Welcome to Reading Bear. Today we've got a story where OP's own parents demand he sign his business over because they claim he owes them. I didn't grow up with parents who believed in boundaries. They believed in keeping score. If I got an A, it was because they drove me to school when I was younger. If I got a promotion, it was because they taught me a work ethic. And when I started my business, they decided it was because they let me crash on their couch for a couple of months when I was saving up for a security deposit. In their minds, everything I had was theirs by chain of credit. It wasn't support. It was an invoice with compound interest that only they could calculate. The business is boring to most people when I describe it. That's fine by me. I run a commercial cleaning outfit. Offices, clinics, a couple of small manufacturing floors, a church, 2 daycare centers, nothing glamorous. I started with a used van I paid cash for and a bucket I still keep in the garage. I cleaned toilets, mopped floors, and did the paperwork in the dead hours. I hired my first 2 employees, not long after landing a mid-sized office park that needed overnight crews. Slowly, I built it out. We used checklists. We were reliable. We didn't cut corners. Clients liked that. It grew into a decent thing. My parents' involvement was to send texts that looked like support but were really control in disguise. Proud of you. Followed by, make sure you put your mother on your business account as a backup signer in case something happens to you. Or, happy for you. Followed by, we should discuss how we'll structure the family ownership to protect you from taxes. I ignored most of it. I never put them on anything. The bank accounts, the LLC, the insurance policies, everything had my name and my manager's name. I had a CPA and an attorney for the boring stuff, because I'd rather spend a little money than make a big mistake. Then I landed a new clinic system, 4 small locations, 2 nights each, with a rotation for deep cleans. It was the biggest contract I'd signed to date. I sent a photo of the signed service agreement to my group chat, like an excited kid. A minute later, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "We did it!" My father chimed in. "Our business is moving up." I stared at the messages. "Our?" I typed back a polite thing. "Thanks for the encouragement. Love you," and put the phone away. 2 days after that, they invited me to dinner. My mother said it like a peace offering. "We want to celebrate," she said. My father added, "and talk about structure." Structure is their favorite word when they mean power. I showed up anyway, because families do that, show up, and hope it's just dinner. The table was set like a holiday. They'd even put out a printed agenda next to the salad plates. That was my first clue. I hadn't sat down before my father started. "We've decided it's time to formalize ownership," he said, like a boss starting a meeting. My mother slid a folder across the table. A transfer of ownership agreement, printed from some template farm online, with my business name typed in crookedly. It said that I, the undersigned, would transfer full ownership and management rights of my company to them, in consideration of moral debts owed for decades of parental support. My mother looked pleased with herself. "This is cleaner," she said. "You sign, then we'll take over the big picture. You can focus on the day-to-day without stress." "What stress?" I asked. "The stress of decision-making," my father said. "You're too close to it. We'll grow it properly. Add family to payroll. Expand. You owe us this opportunity." There it was. You owe us. The phrase I'd been hearing in different forms since I was old enough to want anything of my own. I flipped through the pages. It was the kind of document that might impress someone who never read a real contract. It had bold fonts, capitalized words, and solemn phrases like hereby and forthwith. It also had a signature line for me, and 2 lines for them labeled Parent 1 and Parent 2, which told me exactly how much legal advice had gone into it. I closed the folder and said what I always say when they present something cooked. "I'm not signing this." They were ready for that. My mother's face shifted into the hurt mask she uses when she's about to get mean. "We fed you," she said. "We kept you off the streets. We worked while you played entrepreneur with a mop. We're not asking. We're stating what's fair." My father leaned in. "Consider it repayment. You sign, we become the owners, and you'll be set. You draw a salary. No more late nights. Family comes first." This is where people on the internet usually say something like, "I told them to pound sand and never spoke to them again." I used to envy those people. It always seemed easy to them. But if you've lived with people who use debt and love interchangeably, you know it's rarely clean. I left after dessert with the folder in my backpack and a stomachache. They followed up with a text barrage. Then a letter from a friend of the family who strongly advised me to make things right. Then they showed up uninvited at one of the smaller office locations where my crew was stacking supply bins before heading out. They walked around like they owned it, telling my lead which areas needed special attention. My lead called me. I drove over. There they were in their church clothes, nitpicking baseboards, while my guys waited awkwardly with brooms. I asked them to leave. My father said in front of my employees, "You should be thanking us for taking an interest." My mother started listing ways she would change scheduling. I said again calmly, "Please leave." They did, but not before telling me to check my inbox for a final draft. They'd updated the template to include a paragraph about oral contracts and implied equity. That night I called my attorney. He's a quiet guy who always sounds bored until you say something that triggers his inner librarian. I told him what they'd done, sent him the file, and waited for the sigh. He didn't sigh. He asked a few practical questions. Are my parents on the LLC? No. On the bank accounts? No. Do they have liens? No. Did they lend me money? There was that couch period, but there were no loans, no promissory notes, nothing formal. Did they ever invest? No. Any emails where I promised them shares? No. Then he got interested. "You know," he said, "people can say our business all day long. It doesn't make it true. If they try to take over, you have recourse." End quote. "I don't want a legal war," I said. "I want them out of the business." "You might not need a war," he said. "You might need a pen." He explained something I hadn't considered. Technically, I could transfer the entire membership interest of the LLC to anyone. That's what they were demanding. But a company is a bundle. It's not just photos of mops and a logo. It's also contracts, liabilities, obligations, vendor relationships, payroll, taxes, insurance audits, and the stuff you don't see on Instagram. If I signed over the company, including all assets and liabilities, and then stepped aside cleanly, I would be complying exactly with their demand. No sabotage, no fake bankruptcy, just literal compliance. He paused for a beat, then added, "But if you choose that path, you should also be careful to separate anything that isn't owned by the company. Title to the van, your personal phone, software subscriptions in your name, anything you personally own. The company can't transfer what it doesn't own." "I can do that," I said, because I knew what was owned where. The van was titled to me, not the LLC. The equipment was a mix. I had receipts for the pieces the company owned and the few I'd bought before forming the company. The brand name was registered to the company, the domain name to me. Payroll was through a service tied to the company Fiend. And, he said, give proper notice to your clients about the change in ownership. Most contracts require notice. Don't solicit them to move. Just be factual. If they choose to cancel, that's their choice. He wasn't telling me to burn it down. He was telling me to listen to their words and deliver exactly what they asked for, plus the parts they forgot they were asking for. I slept on it. By morning, I had the calm that hits when a decision finally lands. If they wanted the business because they believed they'd get a trophy and passive income, they could have the business as it actually existed, a living thing with bills, responsibilities, and people to manage. I would not break anything. I would not hurt anyone. I would not steal a single client. I would do it by the book and keep every email. The next time my parents called, I told them we could meet to sign. I asked them to bring their IDs for the notary. My father was triumphant. My mother responded with a string of emojis and a time suggestion. I booked a notary and printed a real document drafted by my attorney. It wasn't their template. It was a transfer of membership interest and manager resignation, with a schedule attached listing assets and liabilities. The first page said, in simple language, that I was transferring 100% of my interest in the LLC to them, jointly, in exchange for consideration received, which was lawyer, speak for you want it, you got it. It specifically said the transfer included all assets and liabilities of the company, and that I was resigning as manager effective on the date of transfer. We met in a quiet room at the notary's office. My parents were dressed like they were going to a ribbon cutting. My father skimmed the first page and smirked. "Finally," he said. My mother said something about how proud she was that I was making amends. The notary did her thing. They signed, I signed, we swapped driver's licenses, stamps went down. It was very official and very boring. I handed them a manila envelope with keys, a laminated list of vendor contacts, the login sheet for the company's email, and the payroll service contact card. "Congratulations," I said. "You own a cleaning company." They took selfies in the parking lot like they'd just bought a yacht. Then I went back to the office and did the rest of the work. I drafted a notice to clients. Effective immediately, there has been a change in ownership of Company LLC. All contractual obligations remain in place. Your point of contact will be Parents Shared Email. If you have questions, contact them directly. Short and factual. I BCC'd my attorney. I sent a similar email to employees. Ownership has changed. Your new managers are parents. They will contact you regarding schedules. You will be paid for all hours worked through this week's close. Direct future questions to parents. I punched payroll that afternoon to make sure no one was left short. I boxed my personal items. I turned in my company credit card. I logged out. And then I waited, not out of spite, but because that's what compliance sometimes looks like. Hands off. Day 1 under the new regime, my phone lit up before dawn. It was my lead, followed by 2 part-timers. The schedule's wrong. Who is this new number texting me? They changed my shift? I responded to each message with the same line. I'm no longer the manager. Please contact parents at email. I didn't add a smiley face or a passive-aggressive note, just the line. My phone buzzed again. A client asking where the set of keyed supply boxes had gone. Same response. By lunch, my mother had left me a voicemail that swung between triumphant and panicked. She said something about how the W-2 system was confusing, and then she asked me to drop by to show her the ropes. My father texted me, "Need passwords ASAP." I reminded him they were in the envelope. He responded, "Password doesn't work." I responded with the written login they had in their hands. 30 seconds later. Still doesn't work. I resisted the urge to drive over and fix it like I always used to. I sent the contact info for the payroll service again. That evening, a clinic manager wrote me a polite email asking if I was still around because the new owner had called to say he wanted to move their cleaning window to earlier evenings to cut overtime, which would have meant cleaning during patient hours. The contract had a clause forbidding cleaning while patients were present. I wrote back with my now standard line and attached the change of ownership notice again. Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk. Day 2. A vendor called to say the company's credit terms were on hold, pending a change in controlling parties. That's very normal, by the way. Most trade accounts trigger a review if ownership changes. I'd had those accounts for a while. They'd given me 30 days net because I paid on time. Now, with new owners, those terms reset. The vendor said they'd switch the account to cash on delivery until the new owners filled out a credit app. The vendor asked me to pass along the message. I did, in writing. I also sent my parents the contact info for the rep. Again, no snark. That afternoon, my parents showed up at my apartment. They tried the old guilt door again. My mother said she felt betrayed because she thought I would transition them. My father said I was withholding institutional knowledge. I repeated what I'd said in all the emails. They owned the company now. They had the documents and contacts. I was not the manager. I kept my voice calm because anything else would turn into a fight they could use later as proof that I'd sabotaged them. They left angry and drilled a text to my phone that said, "You've left us with a mess." It only looked like a mess because they had never seen the work that went into making it look easy. By the end of that week, 3 employees had quit after my parents tried to cut their hours unilaterally. Another said she'd been yelled at for clocking in too early, even though she was following the same schedule she'd had for months. A daycare manager complained that my father had walked in during nap time to inspect and told a teacher to keep the kids quiet while he looked at the baseboards. The daycare contract had a clause: no non-employee adults in children's areas during operational hours. That violation gave them grounds to cancel for cause. I didn't tell them to cancel. I didn't need to. They sent me a copy of their cancellation letter and thanked me for previous good service. I filed the email away and did not reply. Meanwhile, the payroll service emailed my parents to say that without them approving the weekly timesheets by a certain deadline, payroll wouldn't run. My parents missed the deadline. The employees didn't get paid on the usual day. A couple of them texted me, worried, because rent was tied to that paycheck. I forwarded those texts, with permission, to my parents. My father responded with, "We'll handle it," and then called me to ask how to push the button. I told him to call the payroll service. He said he didn't like being talked down to by clerks. I said again, call the payroll service. They managed to run payroll a day late. Employees were furious. A few were now in overdraft with bank fees. My parents texted me that they didn't need this drama. Vendors wrapped up their reviews and told my parents they needed to prepay for supplies. One rep mentioned a security deposit for the floor scrubber lease because of the change in owners. Perfectly normal. My mother called me at night and said vendors were extorting them. I told her it's standard and suggested she read the lease. Then the state labor department sent its routine letter, the annual workers' comp audit due date. That audit is also boring and very important. It's how the insurer makes sure you've paid the correct premium. If you ignore it, they estimate high. If you ignore it too long, they cancel. My mother forwarded me a photo of the letter with the caption, "What is this?" I told her, in writing, "It's the annual audit. Call your broker." She responded with a rant about bureaucracy and how no one told her. I wanted to point out that she now was no one. At this point, 2 clinics had canceled, citing policy violations. The church sent a warning. The office park manager scheduled a meeting to discuss performance. My father asked me to come. I declined. He wrote a long text about family loyalty. I didn't respond. In the background, I did one thing. I formed a new LLC. It had a different name. New bank account. New EIN. I bought a used second van, also titled in my name, because I wasn't about to get locked out of my own work by people who had a knack for turning keys into handcuffs. I met with my attorney and my CPA to make sure I wasn't walking into anything illegal. I did not solicit a single client. I did, however, let the employees who had left know that I might be starting something new and that if they wanted to reach out later, they could. I was careful with my words. After the contracts were canceled and any non-solicitations expired, I would be open for business. Until then, my hands were clean. My parents' complaints turned into threats. They said I had tricked them by making ownership seem easy. They said vendors were conspiring. They said I had sunk the company. I forwarded their claims to my attorney, who replied, "Keep everything. Keep your head." The end came faster than I expected. The daycare cancellations triggered a cash flow problem. The payroll delay shook what loyalty was left. Then the workers' comp insurer estimated the audit and jacked the premium. My parents tried to skip the payment. The insurer sent a cancellation notice. Without workers' comp, you can't legally run crews. The state can fine you out of existence for that. I know because I'd had my broker drill it into me when I started. My parents called, furious and panicked, demanding I fix the mess. I told them to call the broker and the payroll service. I told them to call the vendor rep. I told them to call the insurance audit line. I told them to call the state number on the letter. It was like I was teaching them how to drive a stick shift over the phone while they kept insisting the horn was the clutch. Then the office park dropped them. Not for a single thing, but for the collection of small misses. Doors left unlocked, trash bags not removed, bathroom dispensers empty. A tenant complained about a stranger, my father, wandering through after hours to inspect. My parents sent me a screenshot of the termination, accusing me of telling the manager to cancel. I hadn't. The manager is a professional. She doesn't need me to tell her when a vendor is losing it. I woke up the next morning to a long message from my mother that started with, "You gave us a poisoned chalice," which was funny because I avoid language like that. It ended with, "You'll regret this." I didn't respond. I went to the DMV to transfer plates to my second van. Then I called my insurance agent to bind coverage for the new LLC. Then I sent a message to the former employees who had reached out. "I'm launching a new company. If you're interested in talking, here's my number." I didn't reach out to any clients. I didn't need to. 2 of them emailed me that afternoon asking if I had any availability. They were out of contract. I invited them to send over their scope if they wanted a quote. They did. We signed. In a week, 3 more came over. Each one out of contract because my parents had violated terms or missed basic deliverables. I hired back 2 of my best people at higher rates and cleaner schedules. I paid them on time. We started small, the way I started the first time. But this time I had systems already built and the kind of humility you only get after watching your work go sideways for reasons you predicted and tried to avoid. My parents, meanwhile, discovered taxes, which is a very educational subject when you're the responsible party on a payroll account. The late payroll run had penalties attached. The state revenue department sent a notice. My mother forwarded it to me with a line that said, "Handle this." I replied, "I'm not the owner." She wrote back, "You did this to us." I forwarded the exchange to my attorney for the file. They tried to reverse the transfer. They even sent me a letter revoking my resignation as manager, as if that were a thing. My attorney responded to their friend with 3 short sentences. "Our client is no longer an owner or manager. Your clients accepted all assets and liabilities." Please direct future correspondence to your client's payroll service, insurance broker, and CPA. Short and boring. The kind of boring that wins. The last time I saw my parents in person was at a coffee shop. They asked to meet. I brought my attorney, who sat a few tables away, sipping tea and reading an article like a stranger who coincidentally knew my middle name. My mother skipped the niceties and started with, "You ruined our family business." My father demanded I give back the brand because he thought it had magic in it that would make clients return. I reminded them that they owned the brand. They owned the logo. They owned the website. They also owned the obligations that came with the contracts they'd lost and the paperwork they'd ignored. I told them I hoped they'd land on their feet. I meant it more than they probably know. It's a hard thing, watching your parents struggle, even when they dragged the struggle to their feet and wore it like a crown. My father did the pride thing and said he'd rebuild without me. My mother said she would see me in court. If that happens, I have a folder. It's thick and very dull. Emails, notices, timestamps, copies of checks, letters, contracts, the original signed transfer with the schedule that lists assets and liabilities. Boredom is a beautiful defense. They didn't sue. Instead, they tried to run the company as a family business by cutting corners. That worked for exactly as long as it took for the state to cancel the workers' comp policy and for the last remaining client to get nervous about uninsured crews in their building. The company limped, then stopped. My parents dissolved it informally by not filing anything. The state will eventually catch up and mark it as inactive. If there are debts left, the creditors will send letters to Company LLC. And if there are personal guarantees my parents signed during their very short reign, they'll receive those too. That part isn't revenge. It's how these things work. When you demand you own a thing you don't understand. As for me, the new company is solid. I kept the scope tight. I hired slow and paid fair. I overcommunicate with clients. We do the boring stuff on time. I don't use the old company's brand because I don't want its ghosts. I did register the old domain when it expired, not to be cute, but because I didn't want some scammer using it. If my parents ever want it back for some reason that isn't destructive, they can have it for the cost of registration. I don't hold grudges that go nowhere. I keep receipts because I like sleeping. People ask, in our malicious compliance style, what the malicious part was. The malicious part was doing exactly what was demanded, to the letter, without adding the unspoken labor that made the demand make sense. They said, sign over your business. I signed over the business assets and liabilities, contracts and headaches, the payroll, the insurance, the audits, the vendors, the night calls, the schedules that look easy because they sit clean in a spreadsheet someone spends hours maintaining. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't whisper to a client. I didn't steal a logo. I didn't pull a plug. I didn't change a password. I complied and stopped doing the unpaid work they had always assumed was theirs to command. The outcome was predictable to anyone who's ever run a thing that looks simple from the outside. My parents wanted a trophy. They got a toolbox. They wanted passive income. They got a payroll login and a deadline. They wanted to announce themselves as owners. They got insured crews who needed certificates and managers who needed decisions. They wanted power. They got responsibility. That's the part that backfired on them. Not because I set a trap, but because they never understood that the thing they demanded came with weight. If you've read stories like this, you know there's usually a last twist. Sometimes the parents apologize. Sometimes they double down. Mine did a weird mix. My mother has more or less stopped talking to me except for occasional messages that vacillate between guilt trips and insults. My father sends me links to business articles he doesn't read. I reply with a neutral, hope you're well. It's not dramatic. It's the quiet kind of boundary that feels like heartbreak and relief at the same time. Here's the boring legal detail that saved me. I never commingled my personal finances with the company's. The van I used belonged to me. I kept backups of every vendor agreement and payroll run. I had a CPA who handled the tax deposits and an attorney who wrote the transfer. When it came time to comply, I did it with a signature and clean hands. No matter how loud someone gets after the fact, paper wins. If you're ever in a spot like this, get boring professionals. They don't give you good stories. They give you calm. The night I knew I'd done the right thing, I was mopping a clinic floor with one of my original employees, the kind of person who could make a floor squeak with a single pass. He looked at me and said, "It's nice to be back." I said, "It's nice to have you." He nodded at the reflection in the vinyl and said, "You can always tell when it's done right. You shouldn't notice anything except clean." That's the whole thing I love about this work. When it's good, it disappears. No one claps. No one takes selfies. They just go about their day and don't think about dust. I didn't write this to dunk on my parents or to prove anything. I wrote it because people ask how you handle it when someone with authority, a boss, a bureaucrat, or a parent demands something unreasonable. There isn't always a heroic answer. Sometimes the right move is to comply exactly and then stop doing the invisible extras that made their demand bearable. You don't change the rules. You follow them in full. You let gravity do the rest. In the months since, I've had to remind myself not to explain my decisions to people who are committed to misunderstanding them. My parents still believe that they built my business with support they never gave. They tell people I stole from them by signing a document they celebrated. I don't argue. My employees are paid on time. My clients are happy. My spreadsheets balance. The vans start. The floors squeak. I sleep. If there's a moral, it isn't go no contact or outsue everyone. It's smaller and harder. Be precise. When someone demands a thing you know will hurt them and you check your paperwork, call your boring professionals, and then do exactly what they said. No less, and this is the real trick, no more. That last part is where I used to fail. I used to add. I used to smooth and cushion and rescue. I thought I was being kind. I was actually teaching people that my labor was background noise. The day I stopped doing the background noise, my parents learned what they demanded. They didn't like the sound of it. They still don't. But that sound isn't mine to fix anymore. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you again tomorrow.